Right, team. Let's do this. Thanks for coming down, guys. I am just videoing this just because there's about half a dozen people who want to learn about it but aren't here. So if you ask any questions, you're going to be in the background there somewhere, maybe. It's all good. So, who knows what the zone diet is? I know a few people did it last year, a couple. I think I've talked to Benny about it a few times, but I guess I don't know, the zone diet for me is something that I've pretty much been doing fitness my whole life, about 20 odd years now, and it's probably the only thing that I feel like has a decent grasp of, I don't know, trying to eat normally in my eyes anyway. So we'll go through it, I'll explain how it works. I don't actually like calling it a diet because I know that's got a bit of a negative connotation surrounding, you know, diets always sound like something that's making you starve yourself, and that's not what this is about. So we'll try and explain why that happens and how we can eat a little better. So I guess the basis of the zone diet is that you all probably know that there's the three macronutrients that go thrown around all the time, which are protein, carbs and fat. This diet is designed so that you can have all those things in your diet. So each macronutrient has very specific functions in the body, and they're all very important. So it's important to have all of them in, I guess, a set amount each day to try and, you know, make sure your hormones are producing properly, and just making sure your body's functioning how it should. So there's a bit of information in that first bit. We're not going to go too deep into it. You can kind of have a read. Hey mate, there's a spare one just there if you want to grab that. But I'm just going to kind of explain how it works and how you'd figure out what you want to eat, all those sort of things. So I'm just going to pick where I want to start with this. All right. So I'll go through essentially how this sort of thing works, and then we'll go into a little bit more detail. So with the zone diet, basically it gives you, once we figure out what we want to try and aim for in terms of intake, blocks. Now the blocks are separated into those three macronutrients, so fat, carbohydrate and protein. And essentially the idea is that at each meal you have an even amount of each of those macronutrients. So if you turn, let's just have a look at what this all means to, I'll find the right page. I think the first one is this big table of protein block equivalents. So it looks like this. At the top it says protein block equivalents. So basically the blocks are separated. So one block of protein is essentially 7 grams of protein. For carbohydrate, it is 9 grams of carbohydrate. And for fat, I think it is 1.5 grams off the top of my head. Yep. So basically what this little table shows now is how much of each type of meat or protein type it takes to get that one block. So if you're only having one block of the first one, beef, it would be 28 grams. Now obviously that's not going to be what most of your meals will be. You know, it might be a 3-block meal, might be a 5-block meal, but basically you just multiply these out by that value. So there's also, you'll notice, best choices, fair choices, poor choices and stuff like that. So I guess you can still have things that aren't necessarily perfect, and you can still get your protein from that, and it gives you those things, but it also gives you the ideal things you want to be eating as well, as a bit of a guide. So if you turn over, you'll see the carbohydrate ones. Now on this first page, it's basically all the low density carbohydrates. So what that means is per 100 grams, they have a low carbohydrate quantity. So like if you look at in that first column there, let's just have a look at broccoli. You can eat 3 cups of broccoli for one block of, so 9 grams of carbohydrates. So that's a lot of food, yeah. So basically what it's saying is like these ones are things that you can eat a lot of that doesn't have a lot of carbohydrates, and we'll go into why that's important in a sec. As you turn over, you've got different types of carbs, so the higher density ones, you're thinking things like rice, bread, things like that, give you a lot of carbohydrates quickly, and that's where we often blow our, I guess, our daily intake on things like that, where we can eat a lot of rice, and it has a shit ton of energy in it as well, so it really quickly accelerates how much carbohydrate you've eaten in that day. There's even a little thing with alcohol there, so it's not saying that you can't have that, but it also shows you how much that contributes to your, I guess, daily intake as well. The final page there, guys, it's just a couple with the fat blocks. Same thing, there's better choices, fair choices, and poor. Better are all your monosaturated stuff, so you probably heard that term around, like olive oil, avocado, those things are super important. But you also notice that you can't have a ton of that stuff because it adds up really quickly. Fat is very high in calories, but it's still important. So, how much should you be having and how does it work? So I've kind of written up a really quick scientific estimate for you all if you want to figure this out. So basically we know that through research, pretty certain that there's a bit of a range, but I've just kind of picked right in the middle that if you are resistance training, which all you guys are if you're coming and doing CrossFit, that you should be having around, and it's give or take a little bit, this is a bit of an average, at least 1.5 grams of protein per kilo of your body weight. So I've given you an example of myself, and luckily enough I'm right on an easy calculation. So for me right now I'm around about 100 kilos. So for me I multiply it out by 1.5, which gives me 150 grams of protein per day is what I need to just maintain where I'm at right now. If I divide that by 7, which is 1 block of protein we spoke about, it ends up being 21.4, so I'm just going to round that up. For me, in a day I need 22 blocks of protein. So if you went to that table, 1 block of beef was 28 grams. If I just ate beef the whole day, I would multiply that by 22, and that's how much beef I could eat if that's the only decision I was going to make on what protein. Obviously you can mix it up. That gives you an idea. So if you were to do your current weight, that's sort of how you do it. Now if you wanted to potentially lose weight or gain weight, my recommendation is that you don't calculate it any less than minus 10%. So if you weighed 60 kilos, oh sorry, this is supposed to be 5%, not 10%, that's a lot. So if you were 60 kilos right now, you would only say that your goal weight was 57, even if it was 55. So otherwise you're just gonna really cut yourself really short and you probably end up really hungry to start with as well. So what I want you to actually do right now, guys, is to kind of figure this out a little bit. So if you can, if you've got a phone or anything, if you need to quickly grab something to calculate, I want you to do this quick calculation for yourself right now. And then we can kind of move on and then I can explain how you would kind of figure out your daily everything else. So take your current body weight, multiply it by 1.5, and then divide that number by 7, and round it up to the nearest number. Even if you're 21.1, I want you to round it up to the next number, because it usually underestimates a little bit. So. 20.01. Does anyone need a hand with that? So your current body weight in kilograms times 1.5. And then divide it by 7. Cool. So we all got a number that's kind of maybe hopefully between 10 and 25-ish. Yeah. Anyone got anything outside of those bounds? Hopefully not 10, because that's very low. So back to what I said before. Basically, guys, so for me, I'm going to use myself as an example. If I'm going to eat, let's say 5 meals a day or something, not 5 meals, but I might have a breakfast, a morning tea, lunch, afternoon tea, and dinner. I'll just use that example as kind of how I do it at the moment. I can break up these however I like through that day. So currently I think, I haven't measured it properly since we did this last time, but I think my breakfast might have been like a fairly large one, which was like 7 of the 22. So that leaves me with 15 left for the rest of the day. So I think I used to do 5, 5, and then it was like 3 and 2. Does that add up to 22, I think? Is that right? That's 22? Cool, so what that means. So for breakfast, I'm gonna have 7 blocks of protein, fat, and carbohydrate. So if you figure that out, it's a pretty large breakfast at 100 kilos. For me, that's what I need to get in. So I can go back to this table. I have to figure out 7 blocks of carbohydrate. So I can go through this, whatever I want to have on that protein, I'm going first, 7 blocks. So 7 times any of this. And you can add different things together. So for me, like I have a smoothie, there's milk in there, there's some protein powder. I add up, I get 7 blocks of protein. Once I've done that, I've figured that out, I'm going to go to my carbs and figure out how I'm going to add that up. For me, as an example, I have some banana, blueberries, and some oats to make the 7 blocks of carbohydrate. So I need 7 by 9, 63, or whatever that is, grams of carbohydrate. And then the same thing with the fat. I have to look through. Because I've got milk in there, it's kind of one of those ones that has both things if you have a look at the table. So it pretty much fills up my fat column, and I put a little bit of peanut butter, and that gives me my 7 blocks of protein, carbohydrates, and fat for my breakfast. Obviously you can make these up to however you like, and then so on and so forth with my other meals. Does that make sense, guys? Yep. Cool. Ask a question, it's fine. I'm sure there's someone else that probably needs to know the same thing. So, what was your, let's say what was your block thing that you got? 18. And how many meals would you kind of have a day? Would you something similar like that? So it's entirely up to you. I choose to have a bigger amount for my breakfast because I'm always really hungry then. But you could split it up, perfectly even, or you could, have smaller morning tea, afternoon tea.
And each meal has protein, carbs.
Yeah. So this number is for each macronutrient. So 7, for me, 7 carbohydrates, 7 protein, and 7 blocks of fat.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I'd go to each of the different macronutrient tables and get 7 of each, or the equivalent of 7.
So then morning tea you'd have 3.
Yeah, that's it. Correct. Yep. Now, back to that. Can we go back to the carbohydrate block equivalent table, the first page, the low density one? So how this works in that you are full and you feel like you don't need to eat too much more food is that you try and get most of your carbohydrate intake from this page only. That doesn't say that you can't use the other ones, but if you really want to be successful on this and really feel like you're eating plenty of food, this is where you want to get most of it from. Now this is not what I recommend and it's not what I do, but just an example of this so that you can see how much food that you can actually eat. If I took all of my carbohydrate for dinner from this first column here, let's say I just chose to have broccoli for dinner, which is crazy talk. We'll leave that for the Globo Gym guys. 3 cups is 1 block of carbohydrate. If I was to just have carbohydrate from broccoli, I would have 15 cups of broccoli for dinner, yeah? It's not a good idea, it is silly and it'd cost you a fortune, but it's just an example of like if you had 1 block of that and then you had 1 block of some other vegetable and things, you can still have some rice in there and you've got a pretty large meal that's going to keep you full and keep you happy as you go along. I reckon that is the single most important tip and key to get the most out of this. The other important thing is that if you're using most of these things is that you get super high amounts of nutrients and like those micronutrients, so your vitamins and minerals from your vegetables, all that sort of stuff come from that page pretty much alone. Still with me, guys? We good? So that's, yeah. These are pre-cooked amounts, yeah. I think there might be like some of the potato and stuff might have roasted, I'll have a look from memory. So like mushrooms boiled, like obviously, I think the ones that say that post, where was it? Where's sweet potato? Yeah, yeah. But if they're not, I'm going to say that they're definitely pre-cooked, especially the meat. So that's before we have cooked it. Yeah. Yeah. Cool. So, I mean, at the end of the day as well, on this, guys, you can choose to be as strict as you like and kind of just base it off generally what you do. Obviously, the stricter you go with it, the quicker, better results you're going to get. But from my own experience, if you're doing this, 90% of the time and still enjoying whatever you want 1 day a week, you're still going to get good results from it, as long as after you have your cheesecake on Saturday night, that Sunday you kind of get back into this rhythm and get back onto that sort of thing. I think that's pretty much it, guys. Have you guys got any questions about any of that stuff?
How strict must we be on the 7 carbs, 7 protein, 7 fats to keep
Like in your meal, so that it's all evened out?
They do 7 carbs, 7 protein, 5 fat, and then add 2 meal.
I don't think it's going to matter hugely if you're pretty good most of the time, but I think, like coming back to the start, if you have a little bit of a read of that stuff, I think the big part of this is to try and have it even to make sure your hormone production is right. So if you're having way too much carbohydrate, that's going to increase insulin and stuff like that, whereas if you're kind of low on something else, I mean, obviously it's not a perfect world, and even if you measure stuff and stuff, you're not going to have it perfect, but as close as you can. I found for me, and it's quite interesting, that fat was something I just didn't think about putting into my meals. I'm like, I had to start putting olive oil into some of the stuff, and you'll be surprised if you're eating clean how you kind of don't really think about that part of it. But fat's super important. There's stuff you can't, there's vitamins that are only in fat that you can't get from anything else, so you need to have that as well. So yeah, so that's something else. The only thing with this is it does take a lot of effort in the initial week or two. Once you've kind of started on it, I know now exactly the amount of meat we kind of need, and it's just simple to get that. But the first week or two, it does take a lot of effort. You'll do need some scales to kind of figure it out, because you'll be surprised if you try and eyeball things how much extra you put in than it's supposed to be. So that's probably the only thing. It is a little bit challenging at first. But if you go shopping, if you've planned out sort of what you're going to have, it becomes pretty straightforward, and you can kind of do that pretty quickly. So basically the challenge, guys, I mean, you can go away and do this without being part of this, but what we're going to do, guys, next Friday night is going to be the first scan, so at 6 p.m. It's the only time I could kind of book it because they're so busy at this time of year with the things. If you can't make that time, they do have them set up at a number of different gyms around the coast, so just let me know. I'll contact them and get a list of the ones for that following week. And there's also going to be a scan on the final week, so I'm just going to confirm when that is. It's going to be probably based off when our Christmas party is, so hopefully we can fit that in. I'm also going to set up a little Facebook group for the people that are doing it. You can post questions in there. Sometimes people post up their ideas that they had, because sometimes it does, if you're doing this, you kind of have this really weird sectioned out meal. You can still make stuff that's actually normal, you can have a spaghetti or something, but you just got to figure out what's what.
That's one thing I struggle with a little bit. This is pretty good for snacks where you have some yogurt, some
Yeah.
you've got all these sort of snacks.
Mm-hmm.
What about full meals and things to have?
Yeah, man. The easiest thing I can say is think about some normal sort of meals and just figure it, and just break it and just